Welcome to the show, Harley Finkelstein, round two. Maybe let's start off with that. How do you think about hustle versus balance?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask that question to. I think that I'm trying to optimize my entire life for no transition time or low transition time. So I either want to be like full on, like hustling and building our business at Shopify, or I want to be doing things that give me great joy, being with my family, meeting interesting people and having great conversations, doing the hobbies that I love to do. But I don't want any transition time, or I want to have it reduced as much as possible. And so I don't necessarily know what the takeaway message there is, but I remember like when I was in high school, I was living in South Florida, the commute from my house to the high school, like wasn't very far. It was probably 2 or 3 miles, but it took us like 30 or 40 minutes to get there when there was a lot of traffic. And I remember thinking that was like the worst part of my day because I was pretty ambitious in school. I wanted to do well. I was also an entrepreneur. I had a DJ business in high school, but that was the worst part of my day, maybe the worst part of the week, because it was just non-productive time. And so I don't think every moment of my day needs to be structured around efficiency or productivity, but I don't want to have time where I'm not enjoying or I'm not building. And if I'm not doing one of those things, like that is bad use of my time. And I think I've optimized that as much as possible.
So I woke up on Monday and for whatever reason, I wasn't feeling excited about work and motivated. So I texted a friend and I was like, I'm sure like you have like a founder group chat. And I just texted these founders and I was like, hey, like, this is how I'm feeling. I don't feel like this very often. And I got this really good response that I'd like your opinion on. And I tweeted it. So one of my founders' friends says, I actually don't think your life will improve much by applying more pressure. I think your life will improve most by creating space to think, by protecting, nurturing your energy, by doing the things you take on really well, and by using your capital in consistent, manage risk ways that you can basically rinse and repeat. You're at the point that if you can use 8 to 10 hours in a highly leveraged way in a week, that creates more return than 50 hours of hustle. Strive for those 8 to 10 hours to be worth $5,000 an hour, and then do all the things with the rest of your time to keep those hours valuable. What do you think about that?
I think that's great. I mean, I think, there's sort of this mantra in our world, in the sort of entrepreneurship world, which is work really, really, really hard. And then there's this other mantra, which is like work really, really, really smart. And I think, by the way, I think platitudes are a silly way to run your life. But I think in particular, those two, like, it's a false dichotomy. It's not either you're working hard or you're working smart. I think there are certain times where you just have to do the work. When I'm preparing for an earnings call, there are, 50, 60 metrics that I have to know. I just have to do the work. I have to memorize those metrics. I have to really understand how we did, what the different, factors that led to those the results have been. There's no shortcut for that. In other times, there's a particular goal. I want to get, over here, Supreme onto Shopify. And like, that's my goal. And in those cases, there's probably a smart way to do it. There's also probably a hard way to do it. And in that case, I find, the smart way is almost always better. So I agree with that. And by the way, you waking up on a Monday and you're not feeling great, like that is a very healthy thing. Nobody wakes up every single Monday feeling like they have the world and by the tail and that everything is always amazing. Years ago, I remember thinking that I think it was on a podcast or I was giving a talk and someone said, have you hit your goal of happiness or something like that? I was like, no. And I don't think happiness is necessarily the goal. And the best example I can give you is that, you may be happy, having a great day, everything's going your way, you stub your toe, and all of a sudden, like, you feel like shit for a few minutes. I think for me, the more important thing is meaning. Am I, like, do I have a meaningful life? Am I doing things in my life that are deeply meaningful to me? This podcast, this interview with you is deeply meaningful. You and I have known each other well before, you were Greg Eisenberg and anyone even heard of Shopify. But so this is a deeply meaningful, conversation because you and I knew each other before anyone else did. And watching each other's journey and growth has been, I think, on both sides of the coin, there's real pride for, it sounds weird because we're in our 30s and like weird to say that, but like, there's a lot of pride for mutual pride for each other's journeys. That's meaningful to me. After this, I get back to like my work at Shopify, which is deeply meaningful. And then I think I told you sort of the pre-show, my wife and I are going to spend the weekend, just the two of us. We've had a lot of we went to Disney World 2 weeks ago with the kids. It was kind of very kids. I don't know. There's a lot of kids stuff in our lives right now. My wife and I just want to have a weekend, just Harley and Lindsay. And so we're going to go away this weekend and just spend some quality time, the two of us. Also very meaningful. And I think the more, as you look at your calendar and your schedule, if there are things in your calendar and your schedule that you're like, that's not meaningful, that's not meaningful, that's not meaningful, then you should make a change. But if you wake up on a Monday morning and fundamentally you're just not feeling yourself, like you're not really in that zone, it doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean you should change everything. You're just maybe having like a shitty morning, and that's okay. And I think, one of the things that great psychologists and great therapists, but also great coaches teach you is to name things. I am feeling this way. What is this? Oh, this is anxiety. Oh, this is depression. So the naming things really help, but also the reason I think naming things is so valuable is that once you name something, oh, like I'm feeling anxious now. Okay, what happened in the last 2 hours that made me feel anxious? Oh yeah, well I had those phone calls. And then you begin to sort of pattern match, and you're like, okay, I actually think today is going to be a tough day, and I can prepare for a tough day because I've pattern matched it. On days like this, I usually leave my desk feeling pretty exhausted. And I think the quicker you begin to be self-aware about those things, the quicker you're able to identify, yeah, I'm not feeling great. It's Monday morning. I'm not the Greg Eisenberg I want to be. The better off you are. And I think that's something that I've only recently learned to do. I think for a long time I had these blinders on and call them like hustle blinders, where it was like I don't deserve to be anxious. I don't deserve to be sad. I have to just work and work and work and work, because like if I don't, everything is going to crumble. And that's not the case. You can still be highly productive and very, very impactful, but also have the acknowledgement that like I'm not doing great at this particular moment.
There's something about where we grew up and how we grew up that equips us with hustle blinders out of the womb. And I'm curious if you can shed some light around, how meaningful, growing up in Montreal, being Jewish, being Canadian, that has, I'm sure you can just shed some light around what that means to you. What have you learned? And, 99.999% of the people listening to this, don't know that, people from that neighborhood. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
So first of all, there's this very, very famous quote from Alexander Chalmers, and it's called The 3 Grand Essentials of Happiness. Something you do, someone to love, and something to hope for, or something that, that you're excited, you're looking forward to. And those are sort of what Alexander Chalmers calls the 3 grand essentials of happiness, or meaning, I guess is the way I would put it. I think there's a fourth one, by the way, which is the environment. I think you also need to be in an environment that inspires you. And you and I grew up in an environment that was deeply inspiring to us. And for those of you that don't know, Montreal is the second largest city, I think, in Canada, maybe the third now, but second or third largest. It is the only city, I think, that is fully bilingual. I guess Quebec is the only province or area that is fully bilingual. But most importantly, it is a city of immigrants. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, Montreal was the recipient of hundreds of thousands and millions of immigrants from all over the world, from every single background. And in the case of my family, where we came in 1956 from Hungary, Holocaust survivors came after the Holocaust, went to Hungary. Hungarian Revolution forced them out of their home again. They ended up coming to Canada. Canada had a program where they let in 40,000 Hungarian refugees in 1956. My father and his siblings and my grandparents came to Canada and came to Montreal at that particular time. So Montreal has been historically a city of immigrants, full stop. But what that has done is it has created a sense of entrepreneurship because of survival. rather than entrepreneurship because of passion. It created a place and an environment where everybody you knew growing up, just about, had a small business, was an entrepreneur, started something. The famous one in Montreal, of course, is the Schmatze company, like a clothing business. There was a big clothing company, but it was a city of entrepreneurs, and everyone you met generally seemed to be an entrepreneur or a small business owner, or in some cases, a much larger business owner. In fact, the heroes of Montreal growing up were people like Sam Bronfman, who created Seagram's, again, an immigrant that came to Canada from Eastern Europe, who created Seagram's, or the Desmarais family, who again, came to Quebec, I think originally from Sudbury, and built this crazy company, or the Pelados of the Quebecor. So two things were just, you were smacked in the face with these two interesting ideas growing up. That one, you knew a ton of entrepreneurs, and two, the heroes of the city, they were not fifth or sixth or eighth generation, aristocrats. They weren't barons or tycoons. The people you look up to were these first or second generation immigrants who happened to build these incredible businesses, and then were incredibly generous in helping to build the city and giving back. And I think that instilled a sense of entrepreneurial DNA, but also this identity that if you have an idea for a business and you grew up in Montreal, there's a very good likelihood that you're going to probably try your hand at that. And I don't think that is the case anywhere else. Not to that extent. Now, I've come to realize, because I've said this, I've given this story a couple times, that there are other cities, Chicago, LA, Miami, New York, like some of the bigger cities have it, but there's a grittiness from Montreal that actually I've seen a little bit in New York City and seen a little bit in Chicago, that seems unique. And people that are going to be watching this are going to tell me, well, your city was like that too. I don't doubt that for a second. But in Montreal, it was so obvious and so apparent. And so I think growing up with that, one, it gave me the permission to always consider myself an entrepreneur. When I moved from Montreal when I was 13 to South Florida, I was like, I went to high school. I went to public high school, big high school, and I was this short Jewish Canadian kid in school. But I was also, I introduced myself as, I'm also an entrepreneur. I have this DJ company, and I'm always, tinkering on these new business ideas. And for the most part, there wasn't anyone else like that. In fact, most of my, classmates in high school thought that was kind of a weird thing. That wasn't the case in Montreal. In Montreal, like a lot of my friends that I grew up with were also like you. I mean, you had a website development company, I think when you were, 14, 15?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So like, it just wasn't that uncommon. When I went to South Florida, it was very uncommon. In fact, it was unique and somewhat alienating. And so that's a long answer to a short question, but I think growing up in a place like Montreal, where we were inspired by the greatest entrepreneurs that we actually knew, we ran into them. It wasn't like we didn't read them in textbooks. We met them at like some Jewish deli. And we knew their stories. Our parents and grandparents told us their stories. We were inspired by that. And so Montreal entrepreneurship, and frankly, the culture, not necessarily the religious aspect of Judaism, but the culture of Judaism is a big part of my life. In fact, so much so that I don't know if I said this to you on the last time we were on, but Lindsay and I, my wife and I, and our daughters, we are actually moving to Montreal in 5 months from now, full time. And part of it was after the pandemic, Shopify is now digital by design, so we have people all over the world, and we began to think about where do we actually want to live our life. And we looked at a number of amazing cities, Miami, New York, some other cities like that. And ultimately we settled on Montreal because we just think it's just very, very unique. And there's nothing like it anywhere in the world. And so we're moving there.
So if you're not from Montreal, or you're not from Chicago, you're not from LA, you're not from Miami, what are some takeaways for people that they could wake up Monday morning and get into that Montreal mentality?
Okay. So I've been thinking a lot about this because I live in Ottawa. Okay. I've lived in Ottawa now. I moved here in 2005 to go to law school. That was the year I met Toby, became one of the first merchants on Shopify. Like that was it was important, but I came to Ottawa to go to law school because a mentor of mine happened to be teaching law at the University of Ottawa in 2005. And he convinced me to go to law school to become a better entrepreneur. I think I've told that story on the show before. Ottawa is not an entrepreneurial city. Ottawa is a government town. 1/3 of, I think it's like 32% to be specific, of the residents in this city work for the government. It's the capital of Canada. So inherently, there is not an entrepreneurial spirit in this city. You don't have the same type of immigrant hustle here you do in Montreal. And that was really challenging for me. And so what we had to do was, because there wasn't organically a tribe around us of other people like us, we had to build our own. And that actually led to Fresh Founders, which was the group of a number of us that got together every Friday, and we created a tribe of our own of entrepreneurs in a city that is not inherently entrepreneurial. And funny enough, that group that we created ended up building, Get Around, Travel Pod, Fellow, Fluid Surveys, Shopify. It's kind of an amazing, interesting group of people. But we had to create our own. And so I've thought a lot about, if you are not in a city that is especially entrepreneurial, if you were, you and I were both in Austin 2 weeks ago, right? I believe,
Yep.
for South by. I mean, there's this crazy energy in Austin. It's unbelievable, right? And you and I have a lot of mutual friends that have moved there recently. Like, every second person you meet is doing an entrepreneurial podcast. And like every second physical retail store is a direct-to-consumer brand. I mean, like, it's unbelievable. I walked down, I think it was 6th Street, and it was Aloe Yoga, and then James Purse, and then Tecovas, and then Allbirds. It was like all these amazing Shopify brands. I was like, I felt like I was home. Most places aren't like that. And so if you don't live in a place like that, you have to cultivate your own version of that in a smaller subset, and you actually have to very intentionally create a community.
So there's two, I want to dissect that a little bit. So there's two pieces of that. So one, what you're saying is peers, basically having peers that can inspire you, essentially. The other piece is mentors. And I think you're a really interesting person with mentors, because you have, in my opinion, a set of I would say obvious mentors, like people who, like, Seth Godin, someone like that, who I'm like, it makes sense that you would look up to someone like Seth Godin and you guys would get along. But then you have a set of non-obvious mentors who might be a lot older. Can you talk more about how you think about mentorship?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is unbelievable to me, even to this point, that I have relationships with these incredible, people. And some of them are very well known. You mentioned Seth, and I'm lucky that I have people like that in my life. But there's also a set of, I like your term, non-obvious. The reason I think that's even more important to talk about is because everyone who is listening has access to non-obvious potential mentors who unequivocally will change their life if all they did was reach out. And so part of what I've been trying to do is just, as I got married and had kids and our business at Shopify continues to grow, is just be on the lookout for people that I find to be really interesting in one particular aspect. So either, great relationship, great parenting, they have a certain joie de vivre, like a joy of life. They have, and forget about age, forget about their net worth, forget about I'll say this isn't just blowing smoke. Like, I really look up to you, Greg, and what you've done with this show. Like, you have this incredible appetite and desire to share these stories around the new version of business creation and community building around and using community to build incredible businesses. And you're just doing this. You're like, fuck it, I'm going to create this incredible Where It Happens program, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it all full on. So I've just been on the lookout for all these different people. And so what I've started to do more recently is take the next step and say, look, I know this is kind of a weird thing, but I notice how you are, with your spouse. I notice how you are with your son or daughter on the ski hill on Saturday. Can I talk to you about that? Can I ask you about how you are so mindful and so present with your spouse? Or can I ask you about I notice you and your wife are always holding hands. That seems so nice and so romantic. And my wife and I like to hold hands also, but you guys are always holding hands. What's that about? And what you start to realize is that all these people that exist, they may be 90 years old or they may be 17 years old. They have something to teach you. And if you can simply just, ask them a set of questions that allows you to derive some value and input from that, they really like talking about this too. These non-obvious mentors, by the way, they don't have a lot of people asking them for their time. In fact, I've enjoyed this so much that I recently put together this project called Big Shot, which is me sitting down with these non-obvious, for the most case, these older Jewish entrepreneurs in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and just asking them questions about their life. And I ended up recording the whole thing because I think that I want to create an archive of these stories. But you realize as you meet these people that are, again, non-obvious mentors, how much they have to teach and how no one has heard their stories. And so non-obvious mentors actually have a non-obvious amount of alpha in terms of teaching and insight and impact that you can derive if you simply ask them about it. And for me in particular, these older Jewish entrepreneurs who came to North America with literally nothing and have built multi-billion-dollar companies and have created the largest charities. In some cases, they brought Major League Baseball to a new country like Canada. In the case of Montreal Expos, I want to understand how the hell that happened. I want to know like how that all went down. I want to know, the person that built 20 skyscrapers. I want to know how that person first got their initial round of financing to build their first skyscraper at 24 years old with no experience. No one else has been asking those questions. No one else has been going after those people and saying, "Can you tell us your story?"
Yeah. So love this. First of all, just absolutely loving this.
Thank you. I do too. It's fun.
Yeah, this is great. So
you would love, by the way, like Big Shot's not out yet. The first episode comes out tomorrow. This is not a plug for Big Shot, but Greg in particular, like you're gonna love this because these are people that are like it's part documentary and it's part sitting in a Jewish delicatessen like on 2nd Street in New York. And like it's like if the walls can talk at an old school Jewish deli, this is what they would say.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say where I live, but I live in an island where the average age is very high. So I spend a lot of my time just sitting in hot tubs with old people.
You should record those conversations from the hot tub.
Yeah. And I know that sounds weird, but
no, it doesn't sound weird. It sounds amazing. If they're having interesting conversations and you are getting access to those conversations, I mean, these are people that have had 3 or 4 lifetimes compared to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have so much to teach. But I mean, I guess to summarize, like I'm fascinated by the non-obvious mentors in a way that like the obvious mentors that I have, I'm grateful for, but I've read their books and I'm able to choose to hear their stories and anecdotes across a whole variety of media, podcasts, television shows, in their books, on, across on social media and on their blogs. But these other people that are equally as interesting, there's a lot of alpha there because they haven't told it. And so back to your earlier point, by the way, if you're in a city or in a place where you don't have like, it's not Austin, Texas, and you don't have like, Tim Ferriss is randomly walking around and showing up and having a conversation. When I was in South by, I think you know this, I interviewed Tim at the Shopify space, and Kevin Kelly just walked in, like Kevin Kelly from 1,000 True Fans, like that. Like, he just walked into the Shopify space like, oh, and actually Farhan, who works at Shopify, he saw Kevin in line and said, I think Kevin Kelly's in line to get into the space. We're like, Kevin, come in. Like that doesn't happen in Ottawa, right? Because it doesn't happen in Ottawa, Canada, where I live, I've had to sort of create versions of that on my own. And it's not easy, but it's incredibly rewarding.
I want to double click into the alpha comment that you made. Here's why non-obvious mentors provide alpha. Is because they're going to help you create products that go against the grain. And when you go against the grain, that's where the opportunities lie, right? Like if everyone is saying, hey, go build a startup like XYZ on Twitter, then you have a smaller moat.
Yeah. It's after we had our first child, after Bailey was born in 2016, my wife and I would go for these walks every day. Newborn baby, like can't do much. The baby's like sleeping or eating most of the time. So we went for these walks around our neighborhood here in Ottawa. And Lindsay, my wife, had said, hey, I would love to go for some great ice cream. There's no ice cream shop. I'm going to create an ice cream company. I'm going to create an ice cream retail shop called Sunday School. And of course, like I'm the poster child for entrepreneurship. I'm like the physical manifestation of like the entrepreneurial spirit. At least I hope I am or try to be. I was like, Linz, great idea. Let's do that. And she's like, great. Who do I talk to? I was like, I have no idea. I don't know anyone that, like, I was like, maybe we can call Ben and Jerry. Like, I think, like, I maybe they'll take my call. Maybe they'll answer my email. Anyways, Lindsay's like, leave it to me. And she went around and she found all these incredible ice cream entrepreneurs and she developed these relationships with them. And Sunday school, like, was rocking. Like the setup, the design, the production, every aspect of Sunday school was like, this is like me being very proud of my wife, like, was fucking perfect. It was so well done. And the only reason, but not the only reason, but one of the only reasons Lindsay was able to get that insight was because she didn't listen to me. She didn't call Ben and Jerry. She didn't call Haagen-Dazs. She didn't call Baskin Robbins. She called these fairly unknown or non-obvious ice cream entrepreneurs, and she began to network in that community, and they gave her all this amazing insight. And if she would have listened to me and she would have called Ben and Jerry's, because my answer for everything is like, who's the biggest ice cream entrepreneur? That's who we should talk to. She didn't do that. She went to these non-obvious ice cream mentors and she was able to build an incredible business doing it. And they were so happy to hear from her because some of these ice cream entrepreneurs are in their 60s and 70s. Some of them, one of them was 85. And they were worried that the next generation of ice cream business owners, ice cream company business owners, wasn't around. And so they were delighted to hear that this 35-year-old woman from Ottawa, Canada, really was excited about becoming an ice cream entrepreneur. And they gave her a disproportionate amount of their time relative to what she would have got if she would have called someone that I was going to recommend.
I think a big takeaway for people listening to this is you want to surround yourself non-obvious. Like, it's good to have these not obvious, for example, ice cream entrepreneurs, but it's also good to have the Harleys or the Ben and Jerry's also. And thinking about, maybe you start not obvious, but over time you can scale with like, oh yeah, now I can call Ben and Jerry's and scale this thing.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, if Lindsay was looking to raise money, or for the ice cream company, I think that Ben and Jerry's could be helpful.
Yep.
I think Ben and Jerry's actually is owned now by a large CPG, I suspect, a big conglomerate. But that's exactly right. Or if she needed to figure out like something really complicated, like dairy tariffs in Canada versus the US, there's probably a lawyer she would have to call there. But that's exactly right. And the cool part about this non-obvious mentorship and that leading to finding alpha is that everybody can do it. There is someone in your town, if you were listening, who makes like, I don't know, like the caps for water bottles. Like, that person may have a huge company that no one's ever heard of. And the stories you will get, number one, will be so fascinating, but more importantly, they may teach you way more of a business than you're going to find in any business book.
Yep, absolutely. I need to share two small but big wins that I've had in the last 3 weeks with you that I haven't shared it anywhere.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, with everyone, but just something that's related to this. So they say don't meet your heroes, but I made a goal for myself that this month I was going to meet my heroes.
Wow.
So I DM'd Rivers Cuomo, who's the frontman of Weezer.
Yeah, amazing.
And to me, he's like a non-obvious role model, even though he's big. Like, he's not obvious in the sense like, he's not Tim Ferriss or Seth Godin. So I DM'd it, if you're watching this on YouTube, I DM'd him this. I basically said, I bet you hear this a ton. Your art has been life-changing to me. Often in LA, would be cool to hang out sometime. And he responded instantly.
Wow.
And he was like, let's do it. I'll be here until June. What part of the world you're in? So I tell him I'm in Miami. He's like, oh, I'm going to be in Tampa, even though that's not even near Miami, but I'm going to be in Tampa in a couple of weeks. Let's come hang out. So I go to Tampa, and I have...
You went to Tampa to meet him?
I went to Tampa to meet him.
Cool.
Car breaks down midway through, of course. Just in the Everglades, which for people who know Florida, it's like there's alligators all over.
Yeah, it's not a great place to have the car breakdown. That's for sure. Yeah.
No, exactly. But I'm doing this, right? Because I'm thinking to myself, how could I make 16-year-old Greg really proud right now? I'm going to the show. So I go to the show. I meet with him backstage, and I have this 20-minute, 30-minute, whatever it was, conversation with him around like rock and roll and music and programming and all these different topics. And I left that show just getting completely inspired. And my biggest takeaway was DM, like, you'd be surprised who would respond to your DMs. Quick interruption from me. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you're getting any value, you need to come to YouTube and subscribe to the Where It Happens podcast YouTube channel. I promise you the experience is richer, more interesting. So if you're getting any value, just stop what you're doing, open up the YouTube app, go to the website, and press subscribe at Where It Happens on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Go press subscribe. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the show.
And by the way, that, like, if he wouldn't have responded, the cost of failure is literally 30 seconds of your time.
Correct.
That's all it is. And by the way, I love that. I especially love it because what you also realize is that you didn't tell us this point of perspective, but what he probably learned from you about the future of music and the future distribution and the Weezer community and like what that Weezer, Africa album did. Like I rediscovered Toto through Weezer.
That's right.
Like it's an unbelievable thing that like you probably dropped all this great knowledge insight on him, and he probably feels like he got as much out of that meeting as you did. And everyone listening can do that exact same thing right now. And again, as long as you don't have a fear of failure or a fear of rejection, which, by the way, you should not have, like, who cares? You may actually build the most, like, you may have a relationship now, Greg, with him for the rest of your life.
Well, that was the cool thing. At the end, he was like, oh, I have to, get back, or I'm going to Orlando right now, but like here, we gotta hang out soon. We're hanging out soon. And now he's like, I could say like Rivers is my homie,
That's amazing. That's amazing. I did something recently during the pandemic. I sort of saw or heard that Tom Green was moving back from LA to Ottawa. His parents live here. And I randomly sent him a note and said, hey, Tom, a huge fan. I grew up watching MTV and watching the Tom Green show, and I think you're super cool. And we hung out. We've hung out a bunch of times. In fact, I think I introduced Tom to you as well. And now, like, Tom is like introducing me to his friends. I'm introducing Tom to my friends. Like, that all happened because of a single Instagram DM. And he had not heard about Shopify. He didn't know who I was. He was like, oh, this kid from Ottawa, where I'm moving to, just reached out. I'd like to meet new people, especially people that seem like they're in tech and doing interesting things. Like, that is unbelievable. And by the way, that was impossible 10 years ago.
So what advice do you have to people who, have a target list of people who could be role models and mentors, and like what do they need to type in the DM for someone like you to open it up and read it and reply?
I find for some, the DM is really, really challenging sometimes because they have a lot of things coming in and a lot of people coming in, a lot of people messaging them. One other way that's super simple is almost everyone you want to meet has some sort of, not everyone, but most people will have some sort of philanthropic charity and foundation they're connected to that means a lot to them. And if you do research on them, it is very obvious what that is. And if you make a donation, it can be literally $18, okay? Because I've tried this. $18 to a charity or a foundation that they care about, and you put in the memo, like, I am donating this because I was inspired by this particular thing this particular person did, and I'm doing it in their honor. And then you DM them. Now it's like, now you have two different touch points. Now all of a sudden, like, I keep seeing this guy's name, like who the fuck is Harley Finkelstein? He gave $18 to this charity I really care about. He sent me a DM. He also bought something from my merch store. He bought like 3 t-shirts and left a really nice comment, a nice review. You can create something that is, number one, very lightweight, very inexpensive, that can give you a ridiculous amount of reach to the people that you want. And then once you have those relationships, like, that's when the work really starts, because it's one thing to get a first connection in Tampa with you, to have a meeting. That's great. But the fact that he is now your homie, means that you have also contributed. Like, you were sending him text messages, you were reminded of something that was discussed in the conversation, and you're like, hey, this is a cool article, you should read this, I know you were thinking about this. Hey, by the way, I saw this other thing, check this out. And that is really how you build real relationships. Now, I just want to say the thing. Some people will say, well, isn't that superficial? You're sort of like, you're using tactics to build a relationship. No, every single friendship, every single relationship is built on some sort of shared experience, some sort of shared centerpiece of interest or connection. And so if you marinate that and like, it is not transactional, because ultimately the only thing I want from these people is to get to know them better. Because I think the more I get to know them, the more interesting they become to me, the more I can learn, the more I can share with them. Like, that is how you build real community. You don't build real community by having a one-time, let me pick your brain, here's 10 questions, and then never call them again. Those people are never going to be, quote unquote, your homies. They'll be your homies if you actually are able to create a real dynamic between like what they need, what you need, what you want. And it doesn't have to feel transactional or superficial, because some of my closest friends today are people that started out as mentors to me. And now, like, they're huge parts of my life, and I'm a huge part of their life. And I feel very lucky to have that. But it's real, like, it's authentic, even though it may have started from what seems like a business pitch.
So step one is do your research. Like, do your proper research. Do your Danny Miranda style research.
Shout out Danny Miranda. Man, he does his research. Danny Miranda found out where I went to high school and drove by the high school before he interviewed me, because his grandparents lived nearby. Like, holy shit, that's like next level research.
That's why I was like, I'm not even going to do research for this interview.
Just listen to Danny Miranda's podcast.
Exactly. So I did that. Do your research. So know what's important to them through that. Step two is, you want to craft a short and sweet message too, right? Like, you don't have like a novel. Don't send a novel.
Yeah.
Either
novel is bad, and hey, can I pick your brain is bad.
Yeah. Don't
right.
Pick
high
your
context. Brain. Like, you're right. Like high context, thoughtful. Don't waste their time. And there's a connection. For like the people that reach out to me now, like, they're like, my life is so public, right? Yeah. Everything I'm interested in, whether it's like Shopify or it's Firebelly tea or it's Big Shot or it's my wife and family, like, I'm so public. Like, there are so many intersections of me with pretty much most people that, like, you can figure it out. And I do the same thing. In fact, it's more challenging because I had to figure out, one of the people that I interviewed recently was this guy named Aldo Bensadoun. Do you know Aldo Bensadoun?
I do. Yeah.
So this guy's amazing. Like, the guy, he's an immigrant from Morocco, comes to Montreal with no money. He was given a small little section of a retail store where he was able to sell his own shoes, sort of a store within a store, and turn that literally a shelf, into a multi-billion-dollar empire called Aldo, the shoe company. Any city in America, in the world, you see Aldo shoes. He built that from one single shelf. And so, like, his story is not out there. So having the way that I was able to first make contact with him was, I remembered that I'd met him at a bar mitzvah that I DJ'd literally 22 years ago. Less than that, 20 years ago. I remember when I was like 18 or 19 or so, I DJ'd a party. He was there and he came up to me and he said, you're doing a great job, or something like that. And so that's how we started this relationship. And then I figured out, retail and commerce and what he's thinking about and his connection to the Jewish community. And that's how I ended up getting him to come on Big Shot and sit down with me. So, like, there are ways to contact everybody. And some of these people, like, other people are not contacting them. And so there's an opportunity for you listening right now to contact those types of people if you're smart about it.
I have a fun Aldo story.
What is it?
So when I was 18, and this is all going to relate. When I was 18, I cold emailed Aldo probably 70 times.
Literally?
Literally. Like, actually. Didn't get a response. So then I went one layer, I was like, okay, who's in his circle? And I reached out to their head of marketing at the time.
Rob Hoppenheim.
It was, nope. She was like director of marketing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've also done the map of the Aldo ecosystem because I was also trying to, get to meet him. So I know some of these people.
Her name was Jillian.
Okay.
And I reached out and she gives me the time of day. I'm 18 years old. And I'm like, I want to redesign Aldo's website. I mean, they have how many stores? They had like 1,400 stores at the time.
Yeah. I
Um,
think at their peak, they had 1,500
yeah,
stores around the world. Amazing.
yeah, amazing. And I was like, hey, I earned her trust. Let's just say I earned her trust. I was, giving her a lot of, yeah, I earned her trust. And then she said, you can have a meeting with Aldo. So I finally did it. And I show up with my two partners who at the time were in their mid-30s because I needed like someone, I still had like a high voice.
I was going to say like gray hair, but they didn't have gray hair. They're in their 30s.
And I'm so excited. I'm like butterflies in my stomach. Prepared this whole presentation for him. And it was just this, it was a picture of like a boardroom. There was like 15 people at this meeting. And then when I sat down, they said, Aldo will only show up for 2 minutes of the meeting. And I was like, okay, are you serious? He walks in. Aldo goes, I'm here for 2 minutes. What do you got? My partners were offended that they got 2 minutes. I looked at it like, I've got 2 minutes.
It's amazing. Are you
amazing.
kidding? You got 2 minutes with one of the most iconic entrepreneurs on the planet.
One of them walked out.
One of your partners walked out. And I was in this position where I was like, what do I do? Right? Well, you got the meeting also, right? Like it's your name on the line, not theirs.
Not exactly. And I was like, that's not me. I'm here. I'm gonna make these 2 minutes count. And I just said, okay, screw the presentation. I'm just gonna have a conversation with Aldo. And it was an incredible conversation.
So, I mean, the lesson there and the metaphor that I think is so valuable is like, I never walk out, neither do you. I am never offended. I don't never walk out. Like, if I can get a minute of someone's time, if I can get 5 seconds of someone's time who I otherwise, or who's I don't deserve to have their time, I'm going to value that because who knows where that's going to lead. And be the person that doesn't walk out of the meeting. Be the person that's not offended. Like, is it shitty that you drove 40 minutes or 30 minutes for a 2-minute meeting? Maybe. Who cares? Like, the guy is running 1,400 stores. He doesn't need a website, but he's giving you time because you were able to influence one of his someone on his team. And he's giving you 2 minutes, which has an opportunity cost because you can be doing all these other things. Like, be the person that actually says, I'm grateful for the 2 minutes. Let me see if I can actually take the 2 minutes into 4 minutes. And what I'm going to say in the next 2 minutes, hopefully gets you to sit down and spend a little bit more time with me. And if it doesn't, I just want to say I'm super, super grateful for the time. And frankly, I really look up to and admire what you've built. And one day I hope to have half your success. And like for someone like Aldo, who's not an ego guy, who's very kind, very thoughtful, immigrant entrepreneur from Montreal, just like you were, he probably was like, hey, like, I'm going to give Greg some time because I was like Greg once upon a time too. And I think being the guy that doesn't get, or the person that doesn't get offended and doesn't get up and walk out, that's the way to win.
I'm just sorry. I'm just remembering how I was feeling in that boardroom. It was.
I wish I would have known this story before I sat down with Aldo for Big Shot because I would have told him this particular story. But you're sort of, we're also kind of in this conversation, we're kind of flirting with another kind of topic, which is this idea that our personal lives and our professional lives like really are kind of mixed together now, right? Like we started by saying we started by talking about non-obvious mentors, but partially like mentors, quote unquote, used to be professional business mentors or professional, like if I'm a doctor, my mentors are going to be other doctors. And I think what a lot of people that listen to this podcast and this show think about is like there is no separation between work Greg and like non-work Greg. It's like it's just us, right? And we want to fill up our lives, our buckets with people that are inspire us, with people that influence us. They may be relationship mentors, they may be parent mentors, they may be business mentors, they may just be life mentors. Like you and I probably know a bunch of the same people. There's someone who you and I both know who actually runs a funeral home in Montreal. And I'll say his first name, I won't say his last name. His name is Ross. And I think when you see Ross, who works in a funeral home day in, day out, there's something about this guy where he's kind of floating on air. You ever notice that? Like he's always happy. And there's always a smile on his face and this wonderful demeanor. And like I don't know exactly everything about his personal life. I know very little about his business. It's a funeral home. Every time I see him, the joke I make is, "How's business?" I hear it's dead, and he jokes, and I laugh, and he laughs, kind of a dad joke. But what I love about this particular person is it seems like he's always floating on air in this certain contentment. And if I ever had a chance to see him not at a funeral, what I'd ask is can you talk to me about how you always seem to be so balanced? Because I'm an anxious guy. There's a lot of pressure on me, and obviously you're in a situation which is very stressful. You see people when a loved one has passed away, but you always seem to be so calm and so collected and so content. Like is that business Harley? Is that the president of Shopify, or is that like Harley the human? I'm not really sure, but it doesn't really matter. I think we're all just trying to construct our own version of a personal board of directors. And I think you can do that now better than anyone, including, now having the founder of Weezer, as one of those people in your life, which, holy shit, that is so cool.
I want to double click on the Ross bit just because I find that interesting. What is it about a guy like that keeps him so balanced? It's such a hard job to do what he does. And
maybe the hardest.
Maybe the hardest. Yeah.
It's like, I asked in the interview at South by that I do with Tim, I asked him, I said, out of all the advice you've ever been given, through all your interviews, he's done over 700 interviews on the Tim Ferriss podcast, Tools of Titans, Tribe of Mentors, what's the one thing that, one interview that really sticks out? And he talked about this guy who had lost, I think he lost 3 limbs. He was paraplegic, and he worked in a hospice. And the advice that he basically gave Tim is given everything I know, don't believe everything you think. That sometimes your mind plays tricks on you. And anyways, that's an aside. But I remember thinking that this guy, and I didn't really understand what a hospice was. I know what it is, but so after I spoke to Tim, I actually looked up what a hospice was. Hospice is where people fundamentally go to die. You don't go to a hospice when you're going to recover. It is basically saying you are going to pass on at some point soon in the short run. So this is where you're going to basically live out your days. And hearing that this guy works there day in and day out and is doing interviews with Tim and on the podcast circuit talking about, stories and insight and sharing positive wisdom, I was kind of blown away by that. And it's kind of like what someone like Ross does. He's in a funeral home. This is where he works day in and day out. And yet he is somehow has the ability to, when you show up there, he's not there smiling and laughing because it's a somber day, but when I saw him recently, after my grandmother died a few weeks ago, he gave me a big hug. He's like, "How are you doing?" I was like, "Not great." He's like, "I get it." He's like, "Let me know if you need anything." But he had this certain joie de vivre that allowed him to be there for people when things were really, really challenging. And I don't know what it is. I'd love to learn more. Although one thing that I do know is that when I have gone into his office at the funeral home, do you know this? His office is covered.
I was waiting for you to say this.
Okay,
Go.
So his office is covered with toys.
There we go.
Toys. There are these toys absolutely everywhere. And so he's figured out a way to, despite working in a place where people are constantly, upset and down and they just lost somebody, that he's able to recharge his battery, because when he goes into his office, his temple at the funeral home, for a split second or for a moment, he looks at these Batman figurines, he looks at these, funny toys, and that's how he's able to refill his own battery so he can be there for people that just lost someone. I think that's incredibly thoughtful, but more importantly, that shows incredible self-awareness that is what he requires in order to recharge. And one of the things I've been noticing is on days where I've had a really tough day where, I've had a bunch of meetings and I didn't get the result that I wanted from, 3 out of those 4 meetings, I go home and I'm not my normal self. I'm not vibing. There's something off about me. And so now when I feel that way, I'll be like, well, of course that's how I feel. I had 3 meetings that didn't go the way that I wanted. The next day I have 3 or 4 meetings and they all go the way that I wanted. I'm home and I've got swagger and I'm high-fiving everybody. And once again, I remind myself that, okay, it's the reason I'm feeling this way is because I had those 3 or 4 meetings. What I'd like to get to, and I'm not there yet, is regardless of how my last meeting went, how can I be a little bit more even keel? How can I be a little more balanced? Because it is not fair to Lindsay and Bailey and Zoe, my daughters, my wife. It's not fair to them that someone else that I'm talking to in a professional context is affecting how their dad and Lindsay's husband is showing up at home. And I'm not there yet, but I think Ross would be the person to learn from in that respect.
Couldn't agree more. So happy you shared that story. And going back to the feedback that my friend gave me in that founder group chat, where he said, do all the things with the rest of your time to keep those hours valuable. I think he was referring to a little bit of recharging your batteries and have those, temples to yourself, whatever it is, toys, sports, whatever it is, and go do that so that you can show up with a game face.
Yeah. By the way, like the reason that like the space that I'm in right now is sort of, it looks like this is kind of, I just kind of realized it as I was talking about Ross. It's kind of, it's the influence of Ross. Like those are like prototypes for Shopify awards. That's a Supreme, skateboard to remind. Supreme was one of the stores that I always wanted on Shopify, like for decades, for like as long as I've been in Shopify, I wanted Supreme on, and they came on in January to Shopify, and it's a reminder of like how hard I had to work to get that. That's Savio from Alo Yoga. Like during Christmas, Alo Yoga was exploding. It was doing amazingly well, and I really wanted to, like, they were worried about whether or not Shopify was going to keep up, and so I really went deep in helping Alo Yoga and supporting Savio. Who runs technology and digital there, and he wrote me this amazing, you can't see it, but this beautiful holiday card thanking me for the partnership. So all the things I have here are these little reminders when I walk in after, I grab a coffee or grab some water, or I'm going in between meetings. It's a reminder that, like, hey, that went really well. That took a long time. That went really well. Hey, like, the merchants on Shopify, they're actually my partners. Like, I get to spend time with people that I actually really love and really deeply respect. And I think you need to have that. It's not just physical stuff. It's also the environment. It's also, you mentioned sports, like your ability to do stuff that recharge your batteries. And I think that's exactly what that your text was all about.
I mean, proving the point, right? Like, you learn something. Here you are, president of a $60 billion company, and a funeral home owner taught you, like, you had such a takeaway, right? And
I mean, I could write a book about this guy who, by the way, has no idea. Like, if anyone who's listening to this knows who we're talking about here, we haven't said his last name yet, but like we won't. But like, if you know what we're talking about, you should call him and have him listen to this, because I don't think he has any idea of the influence he's had on me. But it's true, he has, and it's kind of amazing. And all of us have these types of people in our lives where they've influenced us without even knowing it. I don't know. Chefs do that, by the way. One of the professions that I find I get most from is watching a really great chef in a really great kitchen. Doesn't have to be 11 Madison Park. I don't mean an expensive kitchen, but watching a great chef or a great maitre d' or a great server or waiter or waitress in a great restaurant. I find I get a lot of great inspiration watching someone in their environment, particularly in a hot kitchen when it's a packed restaurant. And I watch them and I'm like watching how they are under pressure. And I look at their shoes. Are they wearing comfortable shoes? And I watch their mannerisms and their voice inflection. And I watch how they, their nonverbal, nonverbal cues with their staff. Are they showing gratitude? Are they giving fist bumps? Are they smiling? Are they upset? I find that's one of the places where I gain a lot of inspiration when I love to dine. And so that's quite helpful.
I think this is where we end it. This needs to end only because I think that people...
it's not at all what we thought we would talk about, I think. I thought we'd talk more about, like, Lauren Bostic and Skinny Confidential and South by Southwest and the creator economy. But this is actually way more fun than that. So I hope people got something out of this, because this was like, this is totally it's like a random show, but I think it was really fun.
This is like Tim Ferriss and Kevin Rose have their random show.
Yeah,
this is like
exactly.
Our version of the random show.
Well, actually, so I know a lot about that particular show, because I know Kevin pretty well, but I know Tim very, very well, and I know a lot about that. And partially the reason that goes the way it does, and it's so interesting, it's a phenomenal piece of content they put out, is because they have such deep context with each other. They knew each other well before either of them had Dig or was Tim Ferriss, and you and I kind of have that also. And in many ways, that's like, that's the reason why these things flow, is because we have this incredible shared context. And if we can shape this context into actual, like, actionable lessons for people that are listening, I think that's really cool.
While I was brewing my Fire Belly tea right before this, my girlfriend was like, "Oh, who are you interviewing?" And I said, "You." And then she said, "Oh, like, are you prepared?" Like, and I was like, to be honest, I have a whole list of questions, but with Harley, I'm just gonna like off the cup and just see what's on his mind and just have a conversation with him.
That's great. No, I love it. And thank you for supporting Fire Belly Tea.
Of course.
I too have my Fire Belly Tea here, which I love.
I mean, I'm not supporting Fire Belly tea. Fire Belly's tea is supporting me.
Well, that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's
in
good.
the sense
Although
of like,
I believe you were one of the first customers when we set up Fire Belly Tea. It's funny, what Fire Belly Tea has done for me is, like, I didn't realize how many people out there actually had never had really great high-end tea before. And I get so many notes saying, like, I was a coffee person. Like, when I hear about tea, I think about a gift basket that was given to me, like, at some conference or something. It's sort of cool to kind of see how tea connects people in a unique way.
I've always been into tea, and I used to go to this Chinese tea shop when I was a teenager for
Cool.
traditional tea ceremonies in
I love that.
NDG.
That's very cool.
In Montreal.
In Toronto, I lived in Toronto for a year as a young lawyer in 2008, and they had something called cold tea. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, totally.
So after the bar scene, after the bars closed, you would go to these amazing Chinese restaurants and ask for cold tea, and they couldn't serve liquor because it was after serving time was over, but they'd put it into these teapots. They'd serve you beer, and you'd have cold tea.
I mean, this wouldn't be a random show with Greg Eisenberg and Harley Finkelstein without that anecdote.
Exactly. A little tidbit. If you're ever in Toronto and you're at a bar and it closes and you want to continue your evening, go to a great Chinese restaurant and ask for cold tea, and tell them Harley and Greg sent you.
So I really want people to listen to your new show. Where can people go to do that?
Yeah, it is a very personal project. I've been working on it on weekends, mostly for the last year or so, but it comes out this week. It's bigshot.show. You can just go there. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But it's a deeply personal project where I get to sit down and have these amazing conversations with some of the greatest entrepreneurs that I know. They're mostly Jewish entrepreneurs whose stories have never been told. And we just basically record the conversations, and it's part documentary and part, as I said, kibitzing in a Jewish deli. But you can find it at bigshot.show.
I think if people listen to this and are bought into the idea of non-obvious being a huge unlock, which I hope people are, that's where you need to go.
It's basically it's an archive of non-obvious stories, but every one of the stories has shaped the world that we live in, whether you know it or not. And it's fascinating. And also, I mean, in some cases, these are people in their 90s whose stories, changed the world and just they're not on the podcast circuit. They're not on social media.
All right. Well,
so
thanks for joining. Of course.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Take care.